A wise man once famously said that a hero is only as good as their villains, and in the crazy world of comic books, this idea couldn't be more true. The only problem is that some of these superheroes have been around for, upwards of 80 years, and because of that, a lot of the classics rogues galleries, they're getting a little long in the tooth, a little stretched too thin. Villains that once inspired terror or revulsion are now only inspiring shoulder-shrugging apathy. But surely there must be some good exceptions out there that prove the rule, right? Villains who have managed to be embraced by the readership, have managed to become integral to the stories moving forward, and maybe even some who have broken the mold completely and crossed over into the realms of multimedia. And you know what? That's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at this week on the show. And hey, big thanks to my helper when it came to writing this episode. Who are my helpers? Well, you out there, of course. That's right, the fan base. I'm all over the community tab here on YouTube. I put out the question to you viewers, and you all came in, and you all helped, and you all gave great answers that will ultimately end up inspiring this episode. And also, thankfully, meaning that I don't have to write a script this week, that I can just kind of, shoot from the hip. So if I seem a little loosey-goosey, and, maybe a little less rehearsed, that's why. That's why I sound like that this week. So when it comes to villains from the last 20-odd years or so that made a big splash, became important, and became embraced by the fan base, I think the first and probably most recurring answer I got over and over here on YouTube was, well, the Court of Owls, of course, Gotham's secret elite cult of bird fetishes who bedeviled Batman in the early days of the New 52. And by early, I mean like right at the beginning of the New 52. It's crazy to think that Scott Snyder came up with these guys and absolutely smashed it at his first up to bat. And yes, I know he had been writing detective before that, and we'll probably talk about some of that later on, but the Court of Owls just really ended up surprising everyone. I think it was a story that a lot of people read for the very first time. It was the first comic they ever picked up, and they didn't know that, Batman can have villains outside just the regular Arkham crew, and they can be weird and creepy, and, they can come at him from this deeply personal way, and they can represent this idea that Batman maybe doesn't know Gotham City nearly as well as he thought he did. And because this was the New 52, old fans and new fans alike didn't know what was in canon, didn't know what mattered, so the idea that these new villains were able to really get one over on the Dark Knight, who is always so prepared, I think really still sticks with people so much even all this time later. Not only did the Court of Owls have a great debut in the pages of New 52 Batman, but they were also the big overarching villains for the first Batman event, Night of Owls. So that's two big successes they had right away. We could argue that the group suffered from diminishing returns as time went on. It felt like every time they were used again, they were a little bit of a less and less of a threat. There's also kind of a divide between the Court of Owls as a group and Lincoln March, their de facto kind of puppet, and then eventual leader, and then eventually it's kind of hard to tell. For what it's worth, though, the group most definitely had staying power. Chip Zdarsky used a Russian branch of the cult for his Batman story, and even as early as recording this video, the group showed up once again in the pages of Catwoman, so it's clear that writers are still very invested in this group, readers are very interested to see them come back again, and I don't doubt that down the line we will probably have another story that's on par with what Snyder did in the very beginning. And I mean, Lord knows, people aren't exactly tripping over themselves to write about any other New 52 villain, none that I certainly can think of. Hell, that should probably be a video in and of itself right there, the biggest loser villains of the New 52. Look forward for that one soon. While we're talking about Scott Snyder creations too, I would be remiss if I did not at least give lip service to the Batman Who Laughs. I know the character has kind of become a meme in the DC comic fandom right now, but I think it's really easy to forget that when that character debuted, he was actually huge, and that first story by Scott Snyder, The Batman Who Laughs, is genuinely really good and really awesome in and of itself. The only problem is that The Batman Who Laughs is the perfect example of too much of a good thing actively being bad for you. He basically hijacked all of DC Comics there for like a year. He was inescapable. He really suffered from diminishing returns, so much to the point that the last time he was actually mentioned, actually the last two times he was mentioned in DC Comics, he was brought up as a joke. Joshua Williamson used him in his Justice League multiverse story, where we met the Batwoman Who Laughs, and the characters all respond like, oh no, not this, we did this already. And then even in DCKO that just came out, we think the Joker actually chose the Batman Who Laughs to be his tag partner for the big tournament, only for the Joker to go, nah, that's stupid, I wouldn't do that. So even Snyder is kind of poking fun at the character now and realizes that we're all a little sick of the character, and it's still probably going to be some time until we want to actually see them return in any sort of serious context. Now, a Snyder villain that I don't hear people mention near enough, which is a real shame because I think he's absolutely great, is James Gordon Jr. Yeah, from his Detective Comics run right before the New 52 began. I think there's something really powerful and really affecting that one of Batman's, grossest, most uncomfortable, vilest serial killer villains is a guy who doesn't wear a costume, who doesn't have a code name, he just has a deep personal connection to Jim Gordon, one of Batman's oldest friends and allies. And every time he shows up, it usually is a big deal. I don't think that character has suffered from diminishing returns yet. I think they actually know exactly when to pull him out. And as good as a Batman villain as he is, I think he's an even better villain for Batgirl Barbara Gordon, who, is kind of hurting for her own original villains. But yeah, Gordon Jr., to me, has always been a standout, and I'm glad that they only use him sparingly. Now, that's DC for you, but over on the Marvel side of things, let's talk about Dario Agger, aka the Minotaur, the CEO of the Roxxon Corporation, who Jason Aaron invented for his landmark Thor run. Obviously, comics are filled with evil industrialists, with evil rich guys who want to, destroy the environment and screw with our heroes. Agger, though, really did feel like a fresh and interesting take on this old trope in a time when we weren't really getting them. There's the obvious kind of connection, too, that Thor is a Norse god, and Dario, as we discover, is actually a Minotaur, which is Greek mythology. So right there you have this very cool dichotomy between the characters. Also, even though he is an evil CEO, he has these much bigger aspirations. He wants to go to space. He wants to screw with the Nine Realms. His evil simply cannot be contained to Earth. Giving Roxxon an actual face, too, that you can punch and having them not just be a nebulous corporation, I think is a really good idea. But more than anything, I think Dario Agger's real claim to fame is just how successful he was after his debut in Thor. Jason Aaron used him to great effect, then Al Ewing picked him up and took him into a completely different direction over in Immortal Hulk, and then eventually Immortal Thor, where he's a character who was actually kind of allowed to break the fourth wall a little bit here to try and weaponize nostalgia by recruiting the original Hulk to fight for him, and then even going as far as to buy the in-universe version of Marvel Comics so that he could screw with Thor's story and attack him from that way. Just really creative stuff, really outside the box, and it's something you don't see for a lot of villains, but it's something that Dario Agger really has going for him, and he's a character that every time he shows up, I'm always excited to see what he's going to do next. Another Jason Aaron villain that I know people would get super pissed at me if I did not mention was, of course, Gorr the God Butcher, which, again, debut villain for Jason Aaron's Thor book when all of that started, made a huge splash, was this massive, dangerous threat who could challenge Thor on so many different levels. He also had a very understandable origin story. He's basically like the universe's most militant atheist, plus a bunch of the stuff he also ends up bringing with him, like the All Black, which would actually end up being connecting to another big Marvel villain down the line that, don't worry, we are going to discuss. More than anything, though, I think Gorr actually represents really good restraint when it comes to a writer and when it comes to Marvel editorial. Aaron pretty much got everything out he wanted with Gorr in that first super long God Bomb arc. Then he put him away. He put him away just long enough for people to forget about him that he could bring him back to bookend the series in the final issue of his Thor run, which, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and when he did come back, I think it, hit that much harder when he did. I think ever since then, few writers have actually bothered to touch Gorr. I think he was a villain over in the Phoenix book for a while. I didn't actually read that one, but I heard good things, which again implies that the character definitely has legs. Then you have the movie version of the character, which is, a little different from what we've seen in the comics, but not too far off. The fact that this is a newer character that Hollywood looked at and went, yes, we actually do need this for the Thor movie. This character is way too cool to pass up. We need a really interesting villain for Love and Thunder, and he was the one they ended up gravitating towards, which I think speaks volumes about his quality. But hey, these are arc villains. What about overarching villains? I feel that's a villain subset that's actually a lot harder to pull off, but damn it, Tom Taylor did just that with Heartless in his epic Nightwing run. Here is a character who serves as a rather interesting dark mirror to not only Nightwing, but also to Batman. He's a messed up little kid who only gets more messed up when a butler moves into his house, who is apparently also a serial killer on the run, and he starts mentoring him to be an even worse, even more evil version of himself when he's already bullying young Dick Grayson and all of his friends. He's also probably one of the best examples of the name and the costume and the powers all working perfectly together in tandem. His name is Heartless. He gets powers by stealing the hearts of other people and wearing them out inside his own cyborg body. But he just doesn't steal any hearts. He has to steal the hearts of people who are loved and love other people, and that their absence will make the world that much worse. He's also an evil rich CEO in his own right. In fact, I think he owned an insurance company, so hey, take that, insurance companies, right? Who doesn't love a nice little topical dusting on top of their brand new villain? And yeah, he managed to last the entirety of that Nightwing run. He was threatening. He came at Dick with a lot of different plans, a lot of different ideas. Even just the mystery of Dick trying to discover that Heartless and Lyle Shelton were the same person were really well done. And like I said, this is the type of villain who's probably the hardest to actually pull off, which is why you don't see big arc-long villains all the time, especially in a day and age when a lot of writers and a lot of creative teams don't even know if they're going to get to see that story to fruition and if they actually are going to get all their ideas out in one full run. Another villain I absolutely fell in love with, and their story has reached what I guess you can call a soft end just recently in the pages of Miles Morales' Spider-Man. Of course, I'm talking about the Rabble, Cody Ziegler's brand new arch nemesis who he invented for the series. Raneem is just so cool in so many ways. On one hand, she's this beautiful throwback to classic Spider-Man villains, someone who is incredibly smart, incredibly driven, had a terrible setback in their lives, and instead of looking inward, decided to look outward for someone to blame, in this case blaming Miles as Spider-Man for everything bad that ever happened in her life. I know all this time later, a lot of people still compare her to the Tinkerer from the Miles Morales DLC Spider-Man game, and I think that's a really unfair comparison because, yes, even though they are both technically technopaths, their actual characterization, their raison d'etre, could not actually be more different. There's a lot more tragedy actually connected to Raneem. We actually get to spend a lot of time in her head. We get to meet her father with Alzheimer's. We get to see how her life took this completely horrible turn after Miles ended up winning that lottery to get inside the Vision Academy instead of her, which in that way it's really cool too because it actually ties back to Miles' origin and it gives her a motivation, while still kind of nonsensical because she's mad at the very concept of fate. It is actually one of those things that kind of makes you go, oh yeah, I could see if I lived in this universe I would be a little mad at Miles too, because from the outside looking in, it does look like Miles doesn't make the most of his schooling, mainly because he is busy out there being a superhero, and it's an idea that he himself has to actually reckon with in the story, and it's one of the many reasons why this character is just so damn cool. You could also say that the Rabble is once again another dark reflection of the hero, but it's not a traditional version of it. Basically, both Miles and Raneem had a lot of, hurdles to get over in their lives, a bunch of things that were holding them back. The final issue uses this allegory of the diamond, how they are all diamonds made under pressure, but Raneem, for whatever reason, came out flawed. Hey, who remembers Dr. Daniel Capido? He was a villain in the story The Knight, a book that I have glazed endless times here on the channel already. He is also a villain who is now officially an integral part of Batman's origin, the creation of the Batman of Zur-En-Augh, and also the creation of the Three Jokers. This guy's like an evil Timothy Leary-style psychiatrist who thought that he could help better Batman become the ultimate version of himself by using mental trickery to try and make him into an unfeeling sociopath. Of course, Batman wasn't having any of that. He turned against Capido, and Capido, being a petty little jerk that he is, decided to devote the rest of his life to hurting Batman any way he possibly could, specifically by helping the Joker master the same type of abilities. Admittedly, Capido does kind of get lost in the sauce in the whole failsafe arc, as there's a bunch of other stuff going on. He's technically the inciting incident. You could argue he tries to be a string puller for all of that, but by the end, he just kind of does end up fading away in the background. But he is one of those villains, for what it's worth. I think if another writer was willing to dust Capido off and bring him back, I think he would actually be a major threat, especially given what we already know about him. We did note that he actually does have an alternate personality of his own, like the Three Jokers and like the Batman of Zerna. If I was writing the story, I would probably do something with that. Hey, how do we feel about Janice Lincoln the Beetle? I feel like I can't be alone in loving this character, right? I feel she fills a really underserved niche in the comic scene as far as villains go, and that is she has no interest in taking over the world. She doesn't necessarily want to kill people. Hell, she's a Spider-Man villain, but I think she's like only scarcely fought Spider-Man a couple times, usually because she is more interested in other stuff. She's a lawyer, she's Tombstone's daughter, she's self-serving, she's selfish, but we also see her softer side because she dates Randy Robertson, and they actually had a really nice relationship there for a bit until the gang war story kind of came in and ruined it, which is a real shame because they took this character who inhabited an interesting type of gray morality and said, hey, let's have her be a total bad guy now. Let's have her, you know, actually want to kill people. Thankfully, they kind of abandoned that idea by the end. In fact, they kind of abandoned Janice entirely by the end of that story. She ran off, and I don't think she's ever come back to another story, which is a real shame because I think that character has a lot of potential, both as a villain and maybe even potentially as a hero down the line if they ever wanted to take her in that direction. In fact, hey, I have a pitch for Janice Lincoln Beetle. I'm working on it right now, but don't be shocked if you see me follow up on this on another video sometime in the future. Now, speaking of villainous niches out there, what about the unknowable, dark, Lovecraftian horror beyond the veil of space and time? Of course, I'm talking about the Upside Down Man, the ultimate villain from James Tynion's Justice League Dark series, a series that I feel doesn't get near as much love as it deserves. Feels like it was huge at the time, and then it kind of disappeared, but also that book is really important in Tynion's history, because he's a guy who came from the world of horror books, a guy who infused this series with so much real, actual, skin-crawling terror before eventually leaving superhero comics completely and going off to make a whole name for himself in the world of horror books that are all, you know, uniquely his own. I feel like a lot of villains try and do the whole Lovecraft thing, but they always end up kind of being a little lame or a little underwhelming. Either they have too many eyes or too many tentacles or just, you know, no real personality to them. But the Upside Down Man has so much personality. For one, the design is absolutely amazing. It is absolutely just jaw-droppingly cool and scary and alien and otherworldly. Everything you would want it to be. The fact that he is always drawn upside down, the fact that he has no eyes at all until he has all the eyes in the world. He is the ultimate dark multiverse form of evil magic, meaning that when our heroes are fighting them, they're basically fighting against insurmountable odds every time. And I think he's really, he's only been in this one story, so no one has ever really tried to use him again. So as it stands right now, his record is kind of impeccable. One great run, and that's all. I would like to see someone maybe pick the character up again, but maybe they're afraid that they won't be able to live up to what Tynion did, and they don't want him to fall into the whole, you know, diminishing returns thing that we've mentioned with other villains. But I know if the Upside Down Man came back in anything, I would be super hyped about it. Now, this next one is probably the hardest to talk about because there's like a dozen different villains all tied up into this one thing. Of course, I'm talking about Orcus, the ultimate villainous team that bedeviled the X-Men during the Krakoan era, an era that I think is only looking better and better as time goes on and more people kind of lose interest in what's going on in the X-Men books right now. You have Orcus, which is the name of the organization itself, which in it also has Nimrod, but then on top of that too, you also have the Suits of Sinister, which is the official name given to all of Mr. Sinister's clones that come packing the other suits, like Stellar Orbitus, Mother Righteous, etc., who in and of themselves were all super cool and super awesome and managed to hold up completely different books all at the same time, where they were the main big bads before eventually coming together and becoming the big Enigma villain for the big final run of that series. And yeah, I know the final run of Krakoa isn't necessarily as enjoyed as the beginning of it. They did kind of wipe all these villains away, which means there's probably a chance that we won't see them again. But honestly, they could bring back one or all of them, and I think that would actually be a huge deal because they are all just so interesting and fun, and the fact that they all represent other sides of Mr. Sinister trying to evolve himself and evolve humanity, either be it with alien biology, be it with magic, etc., etc. I think there's just such a cool-ass idea there, and that any of these villains could actually stand on their own, and that they stand as, really high benchmarks in what was, maybe one of the best modern eras of X-Men ever. Also, I'm just remembering too, if we're talking about Orcus-affiliated villains, I should also probably mention FA Long. He's another evil CEO. This guy is more interested in space and, rocket travel and everything, meaning he represents a very particular type of evil Silicon Valley douchebag that we unfortunately deal with way too much in our modern era. I think this guy deserves special credit, though, because he managed to be a really good foe for the X-Men over in that book, and then Duggan, his creator, actually picked him up and made him a really solid villain for Iron Man over in that book as well. I think there's some really cool stuff about how he gets his powers and how it's very similar to the Fantastic Four, and that the only reason he did that in the first place is because he is a guy with mutant parents who never actually developed any powers himself, and because of that, he resents them as a community completely and seeks to try and destroy them. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, and I figure that you could bring him back as an X-Men villain, as an Iron Man villain, hell, as any type of villain in any other book, and I think he would actually be served really, really well. A lot of people also said Mr. Negative when I put the call out, even though that character is technically from 2007, actually making him one of the oldest characters on this list and actually over 20 years old, if you can believe it. Mr. Negative is a really interesting case because he's a great design from an era where Dan Slott and Marvel were really trying to reinvent the wheel and give Spider-Man some new villains that could actually be threats, so they didn't just use the same 6 or 7 all over again. And I think he really ended up succeeding, maybe not even so much in the books, but succeeding in multimedia. Obviously, he has a great turn in the video games, and he has an even better turn in the Ultimate comics that are going on right now. In fact, the Ultimate comics take up his video game origin, which is different than his comic book origin. I know some people argue with Mr. Negative. The problem is that they essentially keep telling the same story with him over and over again. And I mean, you're not wrong. It is that kind of two-faced, I am so conflicted. Am I a good man? Am I a bad man? What am I? I also think, unlike a lot of these other villains, his story actually had a pretty satisfying conclusion when Nick Spencer was writing Spider-Man. I know that's the thing people don't say a lot. Oh, Nick Spencer did a really good job. But the last story Nick Spencer wrote with Mr. Negative felt that, it could actually be the final story with him ever. I hope it's not, but I don't think I've seen him, really be as emotionally affecting as he is in that story, even though he does continue to come back, and he is one of those characters who I do feel is integral to Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery now. He doesn't look weird or out of place anytime you see him at, a big meeting of New York gang lords or amongst the other Spider-Man villains. He feels like he belongs, and that is something that, you definitely do have to give him all the credit in the world for. While we're talking about Spider-Man villains who are older than 20 years, Morlun, that guy actually comes from 2001, if you can believe it. That guy has been around for a very long time. His debut story is great. Everybody really loved that one for good reason, because he was just this weird character that Spider-Man wasn't used to fighting, because he's this aristocrat who is magic and is obsessed with animal totems. There's that first Spider-Man story that's really good. He actually gets a Black Panther story that is also pretty good. And then after that, probably a bunch of, diminishing returns. Spider-Verse introduces his family, and he also kind of ends up getting lost in a sea of people who have more or less the same design aesthetics and the same powers. I think the thing that really ends up saving Morlun, and is the reason that people keep coming back to him, is that he was actually used to great effect in Spider-Man Life Story to kind of mark that final chapter of Spider-Man's history, where it's hey, we're paying homage to every great chapter in the life of Spider-Man, and then once we get to the end, here's Morlun, because he's basically the biggest, newest thing that's happened that we kind of have to keep coming back to. Here's hoping maybe one day they can write a great new story with him, because I feel like no one is even trying as of recently, even though the fan base does hold him in such high regard. The Maker is another weird case, too, because technically he existed before he was the Maker. He was just regular Ultimate Universe Reed Richards before turning to the dark side, donning the crazy helmet, and then being a villain from that point on. I guess we gotta give him his flowers, because he is one of the few pieces of the old Ultimate Universe that not only survived, but maintained. People continued to be interested in him. Writers kept wanting to use him. Donny Cates used him excellently in his Venom story. In fact, it looked like Donny Donny Cates was going to try and use him to launch a new Ultimate Universe before the new Ultimate Universe that we actually ended up getting. Sadly, that didn't happen because Donny Cates was in a terrible car accident. That's why he hasn't actually written anything for a bit, in case you're wondering. I do often think to myself, man, what would that alternate universe be? What would the Ultimate Universe under Donny Cates be? But yeah, the Maker continues to be threatening every time he shows up, continues to have fresh, exciting ideas. He's one of those bad guys who is capable of anything, and because of that, you can take him anywhere. He also has a weird kind of physiology, meaning he's damn near immortal, even though it feels like because the new Ultimate Universe is coming to an end, they might have to decide what the character's ultimate fate is going to be, if they're going to put the genie back in the bottle, if they're maybe going to let the character rest for a bit. I think they should, because after you end up creating your own alternate universe and screwing with everyone's lives at, you know, the subatomic level, at, you know, like the dawn of time, what are you going to do for an encore after that? The answer is probably not much. The answer is he should probably chill out for a little bit before we do the next thing, but that's just my thought. Now, I mentioned Donny Cates, so of course I have to probably mention his biggest, most famous new villain, the one that was mentioned to me dozens of times when I polled the fans out there and asked them what villains were worth a damn over the last 20 years, and that, of course, is Knull, the God King of the Symbiotes, the King in Black, yet another otherworldly Lovecraftian horror show from beyond the veil of time and space, but one who is a lot more tangible, because this guy's got a big sword, man. You have no idea how big this guy's sword is. He's gonna mess you up. He's gonna mess you up with that big sword. No, I kid, of course. Knull is loved for good reason. He's scary, he's effective, he's another Arc Long villain. Not only an Arc Long villain, but eventually a big Marvel Universe villain. This guy was so big and so threatening, he could not be contained. It took the whole universe to fight him at once, which is something you don't really see that often for a villain who is, you know, brand new and created from whole cloth. He's also a villain who does a really good job addressing continuity issues, so he's a real kind of utilitarian villain in that regard. The symbiote planet of Clintar had kind of been in this state of discontinuity before Knull was created, where everyone was asking, well, are they evil alien parasites? Are they, you know, Klingon, you know, honorable warrior types? It seems like we keep getting conflicting stories here, and here comes Donny Cates with inventing Knull, and he's able to explain it all away that, yes, the heroic symbiotes actually locked Knull away because Clintar is actually the symbiote word for cage, and in just a couple lines of dialogue, he ends up making it all make sense, then even goes a step further and goes, hey, you know, Gorr the God Butcher's god-killing weapon there, the all-black? Oh yeah, Knull totally created that, because he's the god of the void. He existed when there was nothing. He was just all blackness, all nothing, and then he used that weapon to cut the Celestial's head off that became nowhere. So they were literally able to create this villain and then very seamlessly insert him into the Marvel Universe and make it seem like he was always there, and those are always the best kind of characters, the ones that feel like they've always been here. Knull is also a good example, too, of a villain who was allowed to come out, do his thing, get defeated, and then actually slumber. We didn't run into another Batman Who Laughs problem, where he kind of took over everything and was inescapable for a long period of time. They actually let him cool off, meaning that when he did come back, and when he eventually, in fact, at the time of this recording, has his own solo series, it all kind of tracks and all kind of makes sense. I haven't actually read the new Knull book. Is it worth reading yet? I'm actually catching up on all the symbiote books in preparation for Death Spiral, which might actually already be out at the time of this video whenever it goes live. But tell me if Knull is worth reading. If so, I'll check it out. Now, no list about modern villains that are worth a damn would be complete if I didn't also include some Daredevil villains, because Daredevil has had some excellent villains over the last 20 years. Muse, of course, comes to mind right away. A dude who is creepy as hell, this serial killer with superpowers who uses blood and body parts to create his art. He's also a guy, he's one of the few villains who I think they're actually okay allowing to be mysterious. We never learn Muse's real name. We never learn what he looks like under the mask, and even his powers are only just kind of explained and kind of go up and down depending on, you know, what the situation in the story is. Of course, he was big enough that they ended up adapting him for the new Daredevil TV show. They had to change a lot about the character because, like I said, we don't know anything about him. Is he an Inhuman? Is he a mutant? Did he get powers some other way? We don't know. He's just really cool and really creepy. He got used again in that Elektra Daredevil miniseries for a little bit. He got to pop back up there, which which I thought was cool that in his second appearance, even after dying, he fights not Matt Murdock Daredevil, but fights Elektra Daredevil. And then just recently, he's also been in the Eddie Brock Carnage book, which is also written by Charles Soule, and I really appreciated him bringing the character back and letting us see him in a new context, a really petty context. If you haven't read the book, Muse essentially chases Eddie all across America just because he messed up his art studio. It's great to see. Now, my final pick here might actually be a strange one, but follow me on this one because I think by the end you'll actually agree. It's the Stumwin Twins from Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil run. These guys are essentially the inciting incident for everything that happens in this book. They are evil real estate developers who want to bulldoze Hell's Kitchen and build it up and make themselves a tidy profit. I know, on paper, that doesn't sound particularly evil, but it's the way that Zdarsky chooses to write them that really ends up putting them over the top. They are this perfect encapsulation of the banality of evil. They do all these horrible things, they hurt all these people and ruin all these lives because it's just second nature to them. And living in the era we do, where so many of us are feeling the effects of crushing late-stage capitalism, and where we see rampant greed bleeding into every industry and destroying everything we once loved, the Stumwins feel so real and often uncomfortable in how real they are. Better yet, they don't just mess with Daredevil, they mess with everyone in his life. They fight Matt, then they end up fighting Elektra when she becomes Daredevil. Even Kingpin doesn't get out unscathed. They try and use him as a puppet, but Wilson eventually figures out, damn, these guys are evil even by my standards, and I feel really disrespected by them. Like, they actually make Kingpin emotional in one of the best scenes in that Zdarsky series, and perhaps the most effective narrative gut punch comes at the very end, and that is after everything they've done, after all of these horrors that they've let loose on Hell's Kitchen, they basically end up getting off scot-free. Because that's the type of villains they are. They don't need code names or Halloween costumes to go out and do bad. They do it all in a boardroom with a pen and a power tie, and 9 times out of 10 in real life, those villains never do actually end up getting brought to justice. They always skate completely scot-free, and that's what happens in that story. And there you have it, everyone, a handful of modern comic book villains that I feel are actually worth a damn. But hey, that's just my take. Down in the comments section below, tell me, what villains do you think will stand the test of time? Which ones do you think have really been embraced by the fans? And which villains do you think are ready to burst out from the page and into the bigger media sphere?